So Arizona State is not playing in the college football playoff this week. They've got some time to wait, but if you're a Big 12 fan, if you're an Arizona State fan, you are certainly hoping that the league via the Sun Devils can make a big statement in the college football playoff. So what is the path for that? What is the best path for the Big 12 to make the biggest statement, get the most out of this college football playoff experience? And the first question I will ask with that is simply like, what should you be rooting for? This is kind of my stab at like a Big 12 fans viewing guide, rooting guide for this weekend. You've got Clemson against Texas, and I think the knee-jerk easy reaction for a lot of people would be, well, I'm going to root for Clemson because, one, I don't like Texas, and two, that would give Arizona State an easier game in the quarterfinals when they go play. Understandable. I get why that would be your initial take, but I do think it bears diving a little bit deeper. And I also might actually suggest it may not matter at all. It may not matter at all which team it is. And this is where, Payson Cougar fan, I think I might be on a bit of the same wavelength as you there. But again, you've got two paths here. Is it a Clemson win? Okay. First of all, can Clemson win? Yes, I think Clemson can. I think the most encouraging thought along that line is that, well, Texas just doesn't have like a super explosive offense that's like running away from people on a regular basis. Not seeing a lot of that out of the Longhorns these days. In fact, there's still just a lot of discussion about Arch Manning at quarterback and whether or not Texas needs to utilize him more. I was listening to a preview of that game earlier today, and that was a big part of the conversation. Hey, like, Quinn Ewers has just been okay this year. Certainly has been a far cry from the Heisman candidate he was built up to be. Do they need to start going to Arch more? That is a sign that the offense is not totally humming. If you're talking about using your backup quarterback, I don't care who he is. I don't care what the last name is. If you're talking about trying to use a second quarterback at this point in time, that's an offense that's not really going to pull away from people. Texas is led by defense. But if you are led by defense, that could get you into more defensive slugfest and just keep a team around longer and open yourself up to more variables about, whatever craziness could happen, whatever bounce one way or the other could happen in a game. I would also say, though, well, and here is something else. This is something else the positive can. I almost started to move forward a little bit too quickly there. The positive camp for a Clemson win. Texas has not beaten a team that is definitively better than Clemson the entire season. And that's not me saying that Clemson is some kind of world beater either. But if we're looking at their wins this year, Texas A&M, probably a pretty good comp, I would say, to about the same level, the same caliber of team, not necessarily stylistically how they're built or anything. But if you're talking about caliber of team, I feel like Clemson and Texas A&M are pretty similar. Texas got that win. It was not a dominant performance by any stretch of the imagination. What did I just say about a team led by defense? And you can keep a team around in a game. It's kind of what happened with A&M. Now, they won the game, but that's the sort of thing that I'm thinking here, the type of game that could play out and give Clemson at least a puncher's chance. I do, however, think a couple of things with Clemson here. One, they sort of just got the SMU game handed to them, in my humble opinion. I think they were basically they were in essence gifted 14 points to start the game. SMU was shaky. And once they got spotted that big lead, they were just holding on for dear life. It felt like most of the rest of the game, or at least right down to the end, they were really holding on for dear life in that game. So I'm not even 100% convinced that Clemson really is that much better than SMU. SMU may have just not been quite ready for the stage with the way that ACC championship game started. That's why I don't have a lot of confidence that Clemson is going to win the game, but it bears discussing here what would be better. What should you be rooting for? I think from a winnability standpoint, it is very clear that Clemson would be the option here. You would want to play Clemson for sure. Just a couple of weeks ago, right before that SMU game, everyone recognized, hey, yeah, of course, Clemson's got a shot to make it to the college football playoff, but nobody was really bullish on them or super gung-ho about it after they lost to South Carolina, really ever since the Louisville loss, which is like a month ago at this point. People have been sort of out on Clemson. The narrative on them was way out after the Georgia game. People started to come back in. They were blowing teams out for a while there. You're like, all right, maybe Clemson actually isn't that bad. Then they lose the Louisville game the way that they did at home, and it was like, all right, well, yeah, Clemson ain't it. So people were out. It's just now after a win where they got spotted 14 points that we're starting to come back in a little bit on them. My other thought with that is if you're talking about winnability in a game in a quarterfinal against Arizona State, that would be at that point Clemson. You're asking Clemson, this team that everybody thought was not it, you're asking them to win 3 straight elimination games against Power 4 conference champion caliber teams. SMU obviously did not win that championship game, but by virtue of being in the title game, they were of Power 4 conference champion caliber, I would say. Okay? So if you are thinking that Clemson has it in the tank to win 3 straight games like that against that sort of competition, beating SMU, Texas, and then Arizona State, I don't know, man. I don't think that's happening for Dabo this year. This is not 2017. Deshaun Watson is not walking through that door. Hunter Renfrow is not walking through that door. And especially when today we got news that the appeal for Shamari Simmons' first half was a no-go. That's worse news for Arizona State in that quarterfinal game. If you missed it or had forgotten, Shamari Simmons is Arizona State's best defender. He got the targeting call by hitting Rocco Becht in the Big 12 championship game. Kenny Dillingham appealed it, trying to say that, hey, looking at where the quarterback kind of turned his head last minute, that was the reason the hit wound up going the way that it did. The appeal did not work out, and because it was in the second half of that Big 12 championship game, you got to miss the first half of the next game. That's a killer. That's a killer. When you combine it with Jordan Tyson being out on the offensive side of the ball, Arizona State will have to be playing that game without 2 of its best players. So winnability seems to be pretty important there. Clemson, come on down. Shamari Simmons, by the way, leading in tackles for loss, 4th in tackles, 3 forced fumbles, a pick. Guy is a really good all-around player and defender. However, if we're going to take winnability and put it to the side and say, hey, shoot your shot, John, this is a conference. Brett Yormark is big, bold, brash. Shoot your shot. Go for it, man. Well, Texas offers that sort of opportunity because, man, revenge factor for the conference if you get that game, right? Texas last year walked out of the league jeering your commissioner while winning the Big 12 title for the first time in a decade and a half. You've got a chance to get them back if you get them in that sort of a game. And the same thing that I said about Texas keeping teams around because they're so much more led by defense and that offense is not spectacular, that principle would apply if they're playing Arizona State too. So it's not the worst case scenario if you're going to get one of the teams in the more favorite tier of the college football playoff who spent some time at number 1 this year. You also are definitely, if we're thinking about what this does for the conference, you are definitely going to get more national respect for beating a bigger name program and a team that I said was number 1 for a good chunk of the year, and it would be an SEC playoff win. And what do we hear all the time, right? We went through this whole thing talking about playoff buys and who's getting into the playoff and Alabama and all that, and how many hypothetical games against Big 12 teams were played, or even ACC teams. ACC, if you want to jump in on this too. How many hypothetical games were played through people's tweets and people's minds, whatever, a lot, and the SEC won every single one of them. We know that the SEC has never lost a hypothetical game. It has never happened. Well, now you get them in a real game. You can get them in a real game in the playoff. Nobody can say anything about, it's a bowl game, we didn't care. All that crap's out the window. You would have them mano-a-mano in the playoff when it really counts. You would have an opportunity to get the SEC there. And as much as we would like to say, well, it is, this Power 2 thing and beating the Big Ten would be valuable. Yes, I mean, certainly, if you wound up playing Ohio State or something in the playoff, yes, there's value there. But TCU beat Michigan in the playoff a couple of years ago, and nobody seems to remember or talk about it. Nobody talks about it or gives the league any real credit for it at all. Unfortunately, it is not really created equal. The SEC wins seem to do more for you because of how everybody feels about the league and the pedestal that it is put on. So that offers a wealth of opportunity for the league. It is undoubtedly, if you are the type of person that is high risk, high reward, take your shot, shoot or shoot kind of a thing, that's going to be the way you would want to go. Here's the problem, though. As I mentioned, I just don't know that it really matters for Arizona State and the Big 12 in terms of how much respect they're going to generate. And it's because, as I just told you, TCU beat Michigan a couple of years ago in the college football playoff. They were the only team to beat Michigan for almost almost 2 calendar years by the time this season kicked off. And yet it didn't matter. Nobody talked about it. Now, I know I can hear everybody screaming. Any SEC fan that's still left around here that's been mad about the video titles and all that the last few weeks, anybody that's still in here is screaming at their screen. 65-7, John. That's why nobody remembers TCU in 2022 beating Michigan. Yeah, I get it. The national championship game being the way that it was is all that anybody remembers and we'll talk about. And they will write off Michigan as a fluke. There were the people that were trying to throw out the narrative like, oh, sign stealing. They had reversed what Michigan was doing, and TCU had Michigan signs and all this stuff. They'll find ways to discount that if you get walloped by the SEC, and that's what happened. So a lot of this is just going to depend on how does Arizona State go out? Do they bow out gracefully, competitively when they bow out, even if they do win a quarterfinal game? That would be what truly tells the tale. I feel like you could beat Clemson, you could beat Texas. We saw Michigan is one of the biggest brands in the sport. Maybe not quite to the level of Texas right this moment, but I don't know. We give Texas so much brand credit. Michigan won the national championship last year. So you beat Michigan. You beat Michigan, and it didn't matter. It may not matter even if you beat Texas, and then in the next round, you got blown out. It will come down to how gracefully you go out. And you're looking at Oregon, Ohio State, or Tennessee in that next game. If you were to get blasted by one of those teams, it's probably all people would talk about, and it would not matter either way. Where do I stand on all this? Like, what would I personally be rooting for? It is just almost impossible for me to look at Texas. The opportunity for Texas to fall flat and lose a home playoff game in the first round to Clemson, a team that, again, nobody thought was going to be there in the playoff, and lose to Dabo and get to see Dabo make some statement at the end of the game where, he equates, he will make up a new moniker, like, the NIL thing that everybody has always made fun of, and equating it to his love for Jesus and all that, which that is totally fine. It's always funny how Dabo finds ways to make kitschy little statements like that. If he were doing that at DKR, that'd be great. I can't root against that. So I will be rooting for Clemson, but I fully recognize that the better play for me in the end would be Arizona State beating Texas. So that's where I'm at. Curious where you're at. Let me know in the comments.